Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fix Your Belief Systems, where we talk about the 5 major pillars of life: relationships, career and business, health, finances and money, and faith or belief. Today, we have an amazing guest. He's written a book. His name is Gregg Ficery, and Gregg Ficery is the author of Gridiron Legacy, which is the pro football's missing origin story. It's a book that I have come to really enjoy looking through the pages. If you love football, and if you love history, this is the book. Gregg talks about, due to his love for football in his hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the pro game's birthplace, he spent 15 years researching and developing the project, which is what really caught my interest. It included a related 6-part miniseries being marketed, titled, I can't say this word correctly.
Massillon.
Massillon. Gregg's 30-plus year career in the financial services sector includes founding his business valuation consulting firm, Integgra Valuation and Advisory Services, in 2011. He's a graduate of Marymount University's MBA program with an undergraduate degree in finance from Georgetown University. Gregg currently lives in Watersound, Florida, with his wife and has 2 thriving daughters who have left the family nest. I love that you ended that. Left the family nest.
That's
everyone.
Led us to Florida.
That's right. Everyone, please welcome Gregg. I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you so much. We met on an event when we were on an event, and I was so happy to talk to you about this book and pick it up. Really, really cool. So what really caught my attention, though, is when I heard how long it took you to actually write this book and how long the staying power of staying with it. So tell me a little bit about that. Tell me about you and what made you go, I need to write this down.
Well, thanks a lot for having me today, Gregg, first of all. Gregg with 1 G. I have 2 G's at the end of my Gregg. And yeah, so I appreciate your interest and the fun we've had since we connected a couple months ago. The project keeps evolving since then. And its own origin story is family lore, basically. So it was unique. I'm not a writer or author by nature. I'm a finance guy, as you said in my bio, and I just had this story in my head and my heart since the time I was a very small boy, and explored it, went down the rabbit hole as information became more accessible and on history, to research with the internet. And so growing up in Pittsburgh, I learned from my grandmother on my mom's side that her father, my great-grandfather, was a pre-NFL professional football player, and that he played on some great teams. I didn't know the extent, how great he was as a player or his teams. But these 3 team photos with him that were on her basement wall, and she had a finished basement, which was unusual in Pittsburgh, in certain, especially in the certain industrial older areas, there are usually cellars, right? The basement is different. So if you had a finished basement, like with a pool table, like she had, and a TV, where I could, hang out with friends, that was a little special. So her standard of living was a little higher, not that she was super wealthy, but than her community. And it was a prominent family in the community. It's a small town that nobody's ever heard of outside of the area called Wilmerding. It's kind of a funny name, but it was a Westinghouse air brake company community. And that company oddly still exists today. So, in the patriarch of the family was her father, that my great-grandfather, who had a successful business career and public service career after his pro football days. And his football playing led him to success and career, which is why a lot of, young people play sports, to make a name for themselves, to maybe get a scholarship or earn some credibility in some field that they'd like to pursue and access. So that's how it worked out for him. So when she passed away in 2007 and we cleaned out her house, I discovered a box that I had never seen before, with lots of pictures, photographs, original photographs from his football playing career. And instantly I knew that this was really special and unique, and I wanted to identify them and learn more about them. And so I started the process and found an organization in Pittsburgh called the Pro Football Researchers Association, which isn't super well known, but similar to baseball, SABR, Society of American Baseball Research, which is more well known. And the head of that group helped me initially start to identify these pictures and point out to me that these were the best players and teams of that era, which was circa late 1890s, early 1900s, the very beginnings of pro football. And he confirmed for me that pro football actually started in Pittsburgh. A lot of people think it started in Canton, Ohio, which is where the Hall of Fame is, but not true. And even players I've met that are in the Hall of Fame, like Jerome Bettis, Troy Aikman, Herschel Walker, they're Hall of Famers, and they don't know why the Hall of Fame is in Canton. So there's an opportunity there that I started to recognize. And sure enough, when I was encouraged by this Pro Football Researchers Association fellow, Bob Carroll, to take these to the Hall of Fame, where he had done a lot of work on his own, he said, they'll be crazy about these things. You'll have an opportunity to learn more there and get their take on it. So it's took me a few years to gather some more research, get the framework of the story together. And when I finally went there in 2012 with my mom, because it's her family, thought she'd enjoy it, several of their executives met with us for like 3 hours, and we took the collection by car because it's big. And they were slack-jawed. They were like, oh my God, like, who are you? How did you get these things? This is unbelievable. We don't have anything much from this pre-NFL era. There's a big opportunity here, for us to display more in our new expansion, and also for you to do a book if you can combine them with the story of that period that's been lost. And why it's been lost, it seems, is that it was tarnished. It was a little diminished by an alleged gambling scandal that happened, which is very similar to the 1919 Chicago Black Sox sort of shoeless Joe Jackson story, only a lot different.
So, Joe, say it ain't so.
Right. Field of Dreams, 8 Men Out, some great movies. But there's also not just a scandal, which a lot of people like, in a form of a story, but there's also a mystery. There's a cold case, that this really never been known exactly what happened, who was involved, whether the players were guilty, whether they did it or not, fixed the world championship game between the Massillon Tigers and Canton Bulldogs in 1906. And so they said, nobody can do this story like you could because you have pictures that nobody else has, and you have some research that nobody else has. And if you can solve that mystery, bingo, and it's going to be big.
And that's highlighted right here on the cover.
Yes. So that's the 1906 team with my great grandfather holding the ball as the captain of the team. His name was Bob Shiring, and he's got his own Wikipedia page, out there. Not that I did it, and there's some mistakes. I got to figure out how to fix some of that stuff. But so the big couple of big things all started falling into place in 2012. The first was that Sports Illustrated was on the scent. They knew there was this story to be done just separately on how pro football started and the scandal. And a writer there named Richard Hoffer, who had written for them for 25 years, was going to do a long form story about this, and he was going to call it The First Super Bowl. And he reached out to me and he said, Greg, I've been at the Hall of Fame. I was ready to research this story. They said, save your time, go home, call Gregg. He's already done all the work. So what do you got? And we went from there. And so told him all the sources I had, suggested he, read up. And then I told him about the pictures. I said, I want to include a couple in your article. And he's like, the best. I vividly remember him saying, pictures? What do you mean you have pictures? He's like, nobody has pictures of this stuff. I said, oh, I haven't. And he said, absolutely, we're going to use some pictures, and we might want more of them for our pro football history book. I said, not going to go there. I'm going to do my own. So he says, good idea. Might even want to help you with it one day, but that didn't come to be. But that's where I got rolling. And then it was after that, actually later in the year, that I discovered in Ohio, tracking, there's a court case related to this scandal. The Canton captain, Blondie Wallace, sued the Massillon newspaper and team for libel for accusing him of participating in this scheme, this fraud, to fix these championship games. There was a 2-game series, and each team was supposed to win one, and then maybe they were going to have a third rubber game to make more money. And so that case never got to court, but I followed the breadcrumbs, and so nobody ever knew, what happened. He couldn't clear his name for history, and he went down in history as a bad guy because of these allegations, but it was never proven. And because he became a big bootlegger, like literally maybe the biggest bootlegger in the country during Prohibition, everybody said, yeah, he was guilty. He was a bad guy. Look, and he was, of course, he fixed these games, but it wasn't clear if maybe being blackballed out of football, led him, he didn't have any other options at that point because he lost his reputation. So chicken and the egg. And I discovered the court file with the depositions before the court, he had to drop the case officially because he ran out of money, or maybe they paid him off to go away, or who knows, he knew he was guilty, whatever. Nobody really ever knew. But he, finding the court case with depositions from several key people involved, solved the mystery to go with the pictures. And that's when, along with some other things I don't want to totally spoil, some amazing history-changing facts and artifacts, like physical treasures that are in the Hall of Fame, all combined to make something very unique. And so I had to go about making the book happen, and that was just the beginning.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I mean, and you're right. It's got twists and turns. It almost reads like a fiction novel or something. Something out of There's no way this could all be true. But I know a lot of people think that professional football, or just football in general, in the United States started maybe in the 50s or 60s, something like that. But this goes all the way back in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Right.
And
exactly.
Pretty cool.
Some people think the NFL started with the first Super Bowl. But that was just the AFL-NFL merger in like 1965 or 66. Packers, Chiefs, Super Bowl I. But no, the NFL started in 1920, and the NFL was founded in Canton, Ohio, but they merged with the AFL later, which was a startup separate league, sort of like the USFL now or something. They put them together. But so the NFL being founded in Canton is why the Hall of Fame gets there, but that's not to say that pro football started there. Pro football started in 1892 in Pittsburgh, which by definition happened when the first person got paid cash to play the game, at least documented, because oftentimes it was kind of under the table. It wasn't cool or ethical to accept money. The AAU, which is still around today, Amateur Athletic Union, oversaw all these clubs that played amateur football. And because they sponsored national championships in several sports like basketball, wrestling, track field, whatever, boxing, your club couldn't be in the AAU it's an amateur club. If you paid anybody to play, it's like a college before NIL, a college player getting paid money couldn't do it. So when they had football teams at some of these clubs, eventually, they would try to lure them with intangible, value things like watches, food, trophies, whatever, things they could pawn in the pawn shop to get them to be members. But eventually, of course, somebody got paid cash, and that would be the first professional football player. And they were able to document with an accounting ledger that was discovered from the Allegheny Athletic Association, the 3As in Pittsburgh in 1892, that an All-American from Yale named Pudge Heffelfinger got paid $500, which was huge money to play one game against the Pittsburgh Athletic Club, their rival team, and he scored the only touchdown in the game. So that was, and then it just took off from there. Everybody kind of figured out what was going on. They started paying more players, and it grew to, over the next few years, to full pro teams. But then by 1902, just after 10 years, they all merged, consolidated, and folded up in Pittsburgh because they never made any money doing it. None of the teams ever made money. So they said, this pro football thing isn't going to work. People aren't that interested. The weather is bad. People don't want to come out, for these games. They're all lopsided games because the pro teams walloped the amateur and college teams they played. There weren't enough pro teams. So the Ohio League, which had wasn't really a league, but the Ohio had some amateur teams that decided to bring my great-grandfather and 3 of his teammates out to Massillon, which is a neighboring town to Canton, and just to help them beat their rival. There's always rivalries drive all this stuff, their rival Canton Bulldogs. And a lot of people remember that name because later Jim Thorpe came to play for the Canton Bulldogs right before the NFL started. And he was a world's greatest athlete and a real national icon. So, yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah. So it all went on. So from sort of like 1903 to 1906, when the big, and it was really taking off. The first national radio football broadcast happened in that 1906 and of one of those games. But then it all blew up in these allegations after this scandal. And there was basically no pro football until about 1915, again, when Canton brought in Jim Thorpe and started over. And then that led to the NFL in 1920. So,
well, I can tell you as far as if you are an NFL fan at all and you want to know how it all started, it's a really great thing to look through and read, but it's really a cool book to have in a man cave or in a basement area where you can just sit and look through some of these pictures and stories and just events. And it's just really cool. I love the history of where people have been and how things started. And I was really under the impression that the NFL really started, or National Football League in general, or football in America started more in the 50s, 60s range, not in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that was a really interesting revelation for me when I got the book. So it was really cool. What was something that let's talk about, just the book in general, but what's something that you were surprised about? What was something that you were like, really? I had no idea, or that was interesting. Something that pops off the top of your head for that.
Several sort of tangential rabbit holes, came up during the process. Some little pro football trivia was a fellow that supposedly was credited with throwing the first forward pass in professional football in 1906, also coincidentally, when the rule was first passed. Because 20-some people died from football injuries the year before. They changed the rules and tried to open up the game and make it safer, and the forward pass was part of that. President Teddy Roosevelt was involved, and he got football luminaries like John Heisman from the Heisman Trophy, Walter Camp, the father of American football, Amos Alonzo Stagg, a famous coach, and they created a new set of rules to change the game. So in that year, therefore, was the first pro forward pass. The Massillon quarterback, his the usual quarterback was a fellow named George Peggy Parrott. And so it was kind of assumed and documented on a certain date in October of that year that he threw the first forward pass. Therefore, kind of cool that my great-grandfather as the center snapped the ball for the first forward pass. But what I've learned by finding more, hard copy newspapers from that year that had never been digitized with the help of my friends from the Massillon area, that there was an earlier forward pass thrown by a different quarterback on their team. So actually the wrong guys got been like the, Neil Armstrong of the forward pass forever.
And you wonder about that, you look back at history and the things that we're told and you wonder which facts are 100%, history is told by the survivors or history is told by
by the winners,
Yeah, right.
To that point, there's a cool quote I discovered in the book that says something to the effect that posterity is likely to be as wrong as anybody else. like just because somebody said so back then doesn't necessarily mean it was true unless it's really documented. So there are a handful of things that I corrected like that. The Hall of Fame acknowledges it, but they haven't really gotten around to changing their exhibits or website yet. But I think the most satisfying thing was solving the case, because sort of like the Black Sox of Chicago in baseball in 1919, as we talked about before the call, those guys, the 8 men out, they were banned from baseball forever, including Shoeless Joe Jackson, Say It Ain't So Joe, who always denied participating in that scandal. He had the best statistics, best batting average in the series, never made an error, but he knew about it, they said, so he was still banned. And it really destroyed, hurt baseball for a long time. And similar to business, so there's a lot of applicable messages to business today that I talk about when I do speaking events and things. When you talk about Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and WorldCom and which was MCI before that merger, Enron, NASDAQ, all those situations, mostly back in the 90s, early 2000s, now even Silicon Valley Bank, three of which I happen to work for, by the way. I am the only person that can claim to work for Freddie Mac, WorldCom, and Silicon Valley Bank. So this really informs and helps me weave together a story about the value of integrity in terms of the outcomes, not just in sports and your life and your business, your reputation, how even in accusations because it wasn't clear whether Joe Jackson or Blondie Wallace for the Canton Bulldogs really perpetrated these frauds, but the perception of such even destroyed their lives. So that's really, I think, as I'm doing more and more speaking events and podcasts, that the message that I want to communicate, in terms of your 5-pillar value system, I think I focus. It's not necessarily faith related. It is faith related in a way, because whether or not you connect your, integrity and values with a Christian or whatever religious, group you affiliate with, the foundation of your values, I think, informs and makes your decision making much more confident and structured, and leads to better outcomes in, life and business. So,
and it also teaches you a little bit about the power of the spoken word and people's perception as well, how they perceive you, and how, the words that people say about, or the words you say about somebody else, how it might take on its own life.
Right. So without spoiling the story, wouldn't it be wonderful if the pro football players had a better story to tell than the Black Sox, who by admission in court, did fix the World Series. They still got away with it in court because they're popular. But baseball still banned them for being involved in it. But pro football, which is our biggest sport, but wasn't always. I think that partly the story was lost because baseball was always the national pastime until at least the 90s. I think the strike of 1994 had a big impact in football overtaking baseball in popularity. Because again, people were upset about the lack of integrity and the players striking for more money. They were greedy, blah, blah, blah. And now in hindsight, it was just like $1 million contracts they were playing for. Now they're getting 300+ million long-term contracts. Crazy. But people really soured on baseball for a while. And
until the steroid era, which I think baseball might have allowed to bring people back because of chicks did the long ball, right?
I love it. Love that
commercial.
Yeah. Tom Glavine lives right down the street from me here in Florida.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
When I come visit, we'll go say hi to Tom.
Yeah. He's working on his golf game daily.
Yeah, I'm actually certified by Titleist as a medical golf instructor if you ever need somebody to come and help you out and show you how to hit it further into the woods.
Yeah. I need a lot of instruction, but mostly isn't medical.
All right. Well, Greg, I really appreciate all the insight and really to finish the story, people have to go and get this book, gridironlegacy.com. So Gridiron Legacy, gridironlegacy.com. It's where I bought mine from. It's where you're going to buy yours. Click the link, make sure you get it. You can read it, finish the story, and then have some closure. I know you're going to, people listening to this are going to lose sleep over what happened in the early 1900s with professional football. I love that you said your great grandfather is right there, right in the middle. Love that. That's really cool. Cause I love looking at the history of, genealogy and families and where they come from and all of that and the history of that. So really great. I appreciate that you took your time in doing this the right way. And it took 15 years, especially in today's society where people want things and they want them now and they don't have that staying power where they really push through. But you did such a great job. It's really well written. It's really thick. It's fantastic. So it's been a pleasure. It was a pleasure meeting you. It's been a pleasure talking with you today. I really appreciate you. Any final thoughts for anybody that's out there that is listening? Any final thoughts you'd like to tell them?
I would say also beyond the integrity message, there's a message of inspiration. Ultimately, the bigger message in sort of the Joseph Campbell hero's journey aspect for anybody that's familiar with that is to when the hero, as it were, comes back from whether it's Luke Skywalker or Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz or Kevin Costner in the Field of Dreams, because this is kind of the field of dreams of football, is when you have a calling and you go on that journey and to discover whatever it is you're meant to discover. And in my case, it was to solve this mystery and discover certain things and honor these people. That your final task is to share the story with people, which was the book and possibly a miniseries, as you mentioned at the beginning, and to inspire them to do their own journey. And because I think Campbell said we're all sort of wired by our creator to take such a journey and discover something meant just for them and to connect with our higher power. So that's really what I want to share with people, is that they can do this kind of thing too. And it's so rewarding, so pass it on. Hey.
Awesome. What a great final statement. And when you have a calling, share the story. I love that. Well, Greg, it's been a pleasure. Like I said, everybody, thank you for listening to another episode of Fix Your Belief Systems, where we talk about the 5 major pillars of life: relationships, career and business, health, faith, and finances or money. And you really did fill a huge gap there with that faith belief pillar. Love that. And really appreciate your insights. Once again, this has been Dr. Gregg Ficery with Fix Your BS. Until the next episode, appreciate you guys, and make sure you fix your belief systems and create your life on your terms. Till next time, have a good one.
Thanks a lot, Greg.